Good evening.
Hello there. How's everybody doing?
Oh, life is good, John.
Oh, another fine week, huh?
Yep.
Today, I just wanted to go over chapters 5 through 7 to see if you had any questions, comments, success stories about breaking throttle and smoothness, which, that's kind of like, I guess, the more minor one. It's very important, but braking and throttle are the inputs that I probably want to talk about the most. So what do you guys think? Do you have any questions?
I've just had I got your book in this course January.
Okay.
So I got to do a lot of reading, but not much practice. So it just kind of got good around here that I could get out to the mountains last week. So, everything's going pretty good, and a lot of it might be just developing muscle memory in that.
Okay.
But where I'm at is, okay, you're coming in to the corners. And I'll go back, when I'm going in a straight line, as far as braking goes, I'm getting the old roll it up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had some email, or I had a little email correspondence with you because I was just tooling around. I was having a bit of trouble. But, you're coming into a corner, and I think historically, I was never a very good rider, but historically, I'd more use my palms to initiate the turn in.
Okay.
And now, you're coming into this turn, and you got this going on.
Okay.
And you got that going on, and now you're all leaned over, okay? And you're trying to keep your arms straight, okay? And now you've crooked your arm like that.
Okay.
So when you turn in, there's so much going on, right? Like you got me doing everything here but standing on my head.
Okay.
But so I'm coming in, but I'm feeling now like most of and maybe it's just my hand position, it'll work out after I practice a while, but I'm feeling most of my turning effort is kind of ends up being right on your thumb here instead of on your palm, because now you've twisted up, so you no longer have that palm that you're pushing against. It's kind of more down here, right? And I don't know if that's
no. So yeah, I get what you're saying.
So
you're pointing out something that is something I probably really haven't considered from someone who's used to using their palms to push the bars. Right.
And maybe that's just where I'm at, and it'll work out. But is that where you're at? Are you mostly doing your turning from in about here?
Two things that I want to answer your question. First, what I would do is practice in a straight line. The brake throttle transitions and the two-step braking process. Get it in a straight line so that it becomes more muscle memory. So just to, I guess, make sure I understand what you're saying is, if I'm going to make a left, I'm on my clutch hand.
Yeah.
I still have my
nice and easy, right? You got that palm there, and you just
right.
Then you can use your brake and your palm. You can use your brake like when you're going straight.
Huh.
Like I can do the straight thing I can do, but man, it just puts me over the top when I get into doing that and trying to freaking push.
So now what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go out on my motorcycle tomorrow, and I want to see exactly.
Good. And I'm going to get out for the next week.
I think what's happening is maybe you're rolling up too much, but then again, I probably would roll up a fair amount.
Look at that. Look at where you're at there, and now you're trying to push something. Like I'm a good soldier, John. You tell me to roll it up, and I'll roll it freaking up, right?
Well, I would tell you this. As long as you're, and this is something that I'm going to make sure that I do tomorrow, because I want to see if I tip left or right, what's happening there.
Yeah. And maybe it's that I'm getting so jammed up because I'm concentrating so much. There's no relaxation in this position. I believe what you're telling me I have to learn, but there's
Yeah,
not
that's
much calmness or
now
relaxation.
the reason why I say roll it up is because it makes sure that the throttle's closed
Yeah,
and we're squeezing downward.
yeah,
What I would suggest you try, and what I'm going to reflect on when I go out and try this tomorrow, is maybe think about when the throttle's closed,
yeah.
if you're continuing, if it's necessary, because
Okay.
it might not be. Um,
Yeah. And I think, yeah, maybe that's part of it, that as a teaching tool, you're trying to really show that, but
roll.
in reality, it
It
might,
might be an exaggeration,
yeah.
but
Okay.
I'm reflecting on what I do, and I typically will be squeezing like you're saying, and I understand where that could be an issue for you because if you're used to pressing with the palm. What I would suggest to do in the interim, and make sure that we do follow up on this, but just make sure you have that throttle closed, and then you can be using the brake lever. One of the things that I teach is that one of the things that I teach is to separate the two.
Yeah.
The brake from the throttle. There are people that specify to use a little throttle with the brake. I find that to be overkill. It's giving you such marginal gains, and to me, it's confusing to overlap
Well,
those things.
and that's where I'm going. There's so much stuff going
Right.
on.
What
There's
I
so
would,
much
the most
stuff
important,
happening in that moment, that
yeah.
I think trying to manipulate your throttle on top of all that would put me right over the edge.
Well, what I would say is you're going to be coming into the turn with the throttle closed. Okay? If you're braking to enter the turn, the throttle will be closed and you'll be on the brake, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So the issue is pressing the grip to initiate the counter steering in a hand position like this is a little tricky for you.
Yeah, I think that was just, it's like I say, when I'm going straight, I'm getting it. I'm getting that two-step, that thing, but it's just, I think I was, it was throwing me off. It was throwing my concentration off quite a bit, that I wasn't getting that nice, solid turning feel. And yeah, you got another course here. So yeah, maybe if you do try it and say, yeah, you are kind of, or am I doing something wrong? Or no, you know.
Here's what kind of motorcycle you ride.
Oh, I got a couple, but the one I've been mostly on is my RT, my 1250 RT BMW.
So, okay, good. Yeah. So here's what I would suggest you could think about too as well. If you're on the controls, holding your hands on the handlebar in a more neutral position, it might be easier for you to, I guess, initiate that turn. Whereas if you might have a lot, if you're putting too much weight on the handlebars,
Yeah.
maybe that could be an impediment to the gentle steering. Because I'm coming off of motorcycles that are more upright seating position.
Yeah.
Where I'm sitting upright more than leaning forward. And it makes it a little easier, I think, to initiate that change if it's really neutral. So I would try it out and see if you have weight on the hand.
And that could very well be because now I'm really just getting into this thing on waiting forward. I used to wait to the side, but now I'm really consciously trying to wait forward. So that's probably aggravating that situation of putting weight. As soon as you put forward, well, you know, your core is taking a lot, but your arms are going to want to help your core. So
Right.
They're going to start supporting more. Whereas I think before, when I was just going sideways, which probably isn't the optimum for
Well, that's not
what you're
bad.
trying to teach, it's easier to keep weight off your arms. So you know what I mean?
2
As soon as
points
you
there.
go forward like this, then all of a sudden your arms are trying to help your core out, right?
I will say that it's it would be totally acceptable not to get, if you're not finding you want to get forward
Oh, I
and you
freaking try. I
and you
love
want
it.
to just sip in, because I had a
No.
grom. I had this little grom, you know, and if I just had to lean in, if I went forward, it didn't work. It was too much, right?
Yeah.
So just moving the shoulders inside, not even kissing the mirror, could be something to do if you're comfortable. There's one thing I will say you can try to do in the interim here. When you're trying to figure out, like, remember this awkward position for tipping in, what I would suggest is obviously a big open area, a wide sweeper, nothing tight. What
Yeah.
I would do is maybe just have your hand fully curled on the grip, right?
Yeah.
And then roll off the throttle without using the brake. Just use engine braking to slow you as you kind of make a little turn. And so if you're rolling off the throttle, it's going to put you in a similar position, but that might give you a little bit more reflection on what's happening with pressing in that direction. And you wouldn't have to worry so much about having the hand on the brake, just to kind of see what's happening with your wrist position there.
Yeah. Okay. You know, I'm trying as hard as I can to get this trail braking in.
Yeah.
Which I need that, even though I'm not quite there being able to go to an apex with trail braking, but that's obviously your goal. But so I'm trying not to cheat this thing and say, well, I'll just, it's easier just if I use engine braking. I still want to do it.
Well,
all I'm trying to say is I'm just having a bit of trouble. And
what I will say too is if you were to go past the tip-in point, and release the brakes, that would be trail braking. So you don't have to get to the apex or past it.
Well, yeah. That would be like on a racetrack, I guess, where you know where you're going. But on a normal mountain road, that would probably be pushing it if you try to get to the apex of a corner of an apex that you can't even see.
Well, we want to get, I guess my goal to get people to the position is, let's say we're going up a hill, right?
Yeah.
We're not, if I'm going into a right or left-hander up a hill, I'm probably not going to need my brakes. If I roll off the throttle, that might do it, right?
Yeah.
So now if I'm going downhill into a left or right, I might be carrying the brake with brake light pressure almost through the whole turn, right? You know, when I was in Salt Lake City, I took did some tours out there for the BMW club, and there was this really nice road outside of town, and there were so many long downhill sweepers, and it was really the perfect environment to teach that brake light pressure.
Yeah.
Just to
I've been
control that speed as you're going downhill, just enough to. So, but I think,
and I'll be honest with you, John. Seeing as I've opened this up to just a general forum, I'll be honest with you. Like, the speed limit on this mountain road close to me is 90 kilometers an hour. Which I don't know.
It's about 55.
Yeah, but it's a norm. I suppose it is like that there. And look, I'll be honest with you. I can go 120 kilometers an hour through those twisties just using throttle, closing and opening throttle without getting to trail braking. And that's, you're almost to the point where if you get stopped, they're gonna throw your freaking bike on a wrecker and you're not gonna ride it for 6 months, right?
Right.
So there's, the application of it is rare, but I want to be able to do it, right?
Here's where we're kind of getting. So when I talk about the cornering in the cornering chapter, which is I think we'll talk about that next week. I'd like to introduce at that point the brake to coast to throttle where you could just brake, or you could just close your throttle, coast, and go back. There,
Yeah.
very often, I don't apply the brake because I'm getting enough slowing control from just rolling off the throttle. But I'm keeping the fingers on
Yeah.
on the lever ready, because if I'm slowing with engine braking, I'm getting much of the same response from the chassis. I'm getting a little weight bias forward. I have weight on the front tire. And so if I need to introduce brake light pressure, a little bit more increasing pressure, there's already weight on the tire. And
Okay, I'll just say, and that's kind of where I'm at. Is like I say, 90% of the turns you can get by with closing your throttle. Now, but where I'm at is I'm still in this position in case I have to brake, or I want to try to learn,
right.
Get this thing going. I probably not have to, and I guess so. Even when I'm going to coast mode, I'm still in this position, just practicing or trying to learn the muscle memory to be able to do it.
Right.
So I'm not saying I'm necessarily doing it, but I'm still cramped up in this position, trying to force a handlebar like that.
The issue is, so many years I rode, and I would have my hand curled fully on the grip.
Yeah.
And engine braking served me quite well. And then occasionally I probably would have to go to the brakes and slow more. But that would take reaction time and these types of things. And what I have found, if you watch Moto America or MotoGP racers, they're trail braking, but what they're doing is they curl their hands immediately back on the grip because they know the next turn.
Yeah.
And so they don't need to have in reserve that the fingers ready to go. And that's sort of the big difference between the road and the track. They know exactly when they're going to stop using certain controls. And there was a video I did a couple of years ago, or last year, whatever, where this one racer, I had him going through the same turn at 2 or 3 times, and you could see his transition from brake to throttle like at the same exact spot. The same sponsors sticker was on the wall, and that's what these guys do. And so do I always use the brake the secret weapon position? Not all the time, but often I do, especially if I'm in an unpredictable area, because I need to have that coverage.
Well, and if all the, most of your corners are blind too. So you still need that in reserve. If you do have to brake, you better be able to brake. You better not be in this position. You better be in this position. Because if there's an animal, you got lots of animals up here.
Yeah.
Whatever. So you still have to be in that position.
I will tell you this. I would definitely suggest maneuvering your hand around into a more comfortable position, because it should feel right. It should feel comfortable. And if it doesn't, maybe it's a little over. Sometimes I question whether or not I'm providing the right direction. But then I think back to, first of all, my own experience. I find it to be the way that I get the most fine control of both. But when you're teaching people how to squeeze the brake just from fundamentals, you don't want them squeezing from, let's say, what I would call the palm pull for the clutch. We want to make sure that throttle is closed. But I can see where that might be a little awkward for people as well. So my advice would be, just make sure that the throttle is closed. Now, maybe that would require, maybe in your instance, you lower your hand position on the throttle. I mean, I'm not in the business of telling people how to adjust the controls in their motorcycle, but sometimes rotating the throttle, the housing, if it moves, could give you, like, so for example, sometimes a throttle, if you have the grip on the bar, or the bar is adjusted in a certain way, you'd have to
Yeah.
it would be in an uncomfortable position. So what I would I would give you those couple of things. I'll think about it tomorrow. I'll
Good.
go out there, but I think that maybe just try and see what happens with everything, just not doing it with the fingers on just start rolling off. I also tell people, push the right hand onto the flange.
Done. Oh, freaking great. I do that. It's perfect. It's wonderful.
But my thing is this, maybe, just maybe, that's contributing to crampedness.
Crampedness.
Is that making you feel more
Could
cramped?
be. Well, feels pretty good until I get into that, but maybe. But I find I got a whole other thing I want to talk about in Throttle, but
Yeah.
I find it really helps control the finer throttle action, putting it up against the flange, right?
You know what's interesting about that? I don't remember ever being taught that.
Yeah.
I just found it and thought it was such a good way to use that throttle.
No,
And I reflected on it.
It is. It's especially if you're riding with these two fingers, and these ones aren't really adding much.
Yeah.
You know, having that extra friction
Sure.
zone is freaking great.
So, Rick, we'll come back to you want to talk about throttle in a minute. But we'll move on we'll go to, I just want to cover a couple quick things with the braking. First of all.
Yeah. I just, so anyway, I'll go out, put freaking 5,000 kilometers on next week, and I'll tell you how I do on.
Excellent. Yeah. I will also say this too. One of the most important things about working on our skills is you're walking a tightrope, right? Because sometimes we have to step outside of what we're used to.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel right at first. But then on the other side of the tightrope act, it's not really smart to go telling people to do things that make them feel uncomfortable. See, because so one of the things that I stick to my guns on is, if it doesn't feel right, stop doing it, because take it to a parking lot, slow it down, get into an environment that is safe, because we don't want to.
A couple of, and I was, after 6 months of winter, I was, to get out there and go. And, but I do think that, especially with the brake, because you wash that front out really easy, right? If you hammer on it, that whole two-step is so important. And I probably haven't practiced enough in a parking lot. And I go, you just want to get out there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Last thing you want to do when the weather's nice is go right around a parking lot.
Yeah, well, yeah, and exactly. That's one of the things that I thought with my book, and I give you the activities to work on the road, because there's Moto Jitsu, Fast Eddie, the guy's great. It's parking lot stuff. A lot of, so he's there a lot of times to coach people through these parking lot drills. And it really does help people with their low speed skills. And I mean, those really are important. It's not all just high speed, but my philosophy behind someone getting better, someone improving their skills, is somehow building the instruction into their everyday riding, into what they're doing on a regular basis, because it just makes sense that people might go out riding with a purpose to practice the brake throttle transitions, whereas people might not find it that exciting to set up cones in a parking lot.
Yeah. Exactly.
And where are you going to find a parking lot?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing.
Yeah. And then the people with the stores are going to come out and throw shit
exactly.
at you,
Yeah.
right?
It's interesting because, like I said, Fast Eddie Moto Jitsu, he uses
ripping around in somebody's parking lot.
Well, yeah,
but anyway, I monopolized a lot of your time. I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that next week and report back.
Good. Good. And what I was going to say is, when Fast Eddie does these, it's in San Diego, these beautiful beach parking lots.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, how does he get these parking lots, open to use? But he found a secret. Now with the two-step braking process, basically, one of the phrases that I sort of put into place after the book was written for the online course was the idea that we want to weight the tire before fully trusting traction. All right. And that's the whole idea behind the two-step braking process. Just, we want to get the brake on just enough to mate the parts together. And that's going to give us a nice slowed, controlled transition of weight. And we get a chance to take the rubber from the tire and deform it into the pavement, and we really can get that good grip up front, and then we can bring on more, the more squeezes we need to. And another thing about braking too is, remember, we want to release the brakes as smoothly as we bring them on. We just always want to just feed it out nice and smoothly. And, that comes with, I suppose, smooth actions on the controls. So really the gist of braking, to wrap up, chapter 5 here, two-step braking process, right? Just so we're not in a hurry to get the braking done and to get that weight forward. And it was really my first introduction so much for the secret weapon, brake throttle transitions or whatnot. Now, the book in the course talks a little bit about 2-finger versus 4 fingers, front versus rear. I tell people use what's comfortable for them, because there is no right or wrong. What you like, you like. As a matter of fact, the secret weapon is, I call it these two, right? Well, oftentimes people like to do this with the brake and the throttle. And I say go for it, because it's the transition, it's the smoothness and the control that's important. If people want to use just a pinky, whatever, but as long as they're getting the technique, I have found that these 2 fingers work. It's what I first saw people do. So maybe I figured that was the right way to do it. And I just did it that way when I kind of put everything together. But it's possible if the first person showed me to do it with these fingers, maybe that's what I'd be teaching in the class right now. But I have explained in videos and other things why I like the first 2. Okay. But again, you can use one. There's people that like to use one. I also will point out in the braking chapter here, I do talk about using 4 fingers when I come to stops and that kind of thing. But as I reflect on my writing over the last couple, months here, getting back into the season a little bit more, I'm sticking mostly to these 2. I have to kind of work to get the 4 back up there, but you're going to get, more control with the 4, sensitivity. But like I said, if you're comfortable with 2, 3, whatever it is, do that. The front and rear, we talk about that a little bit. Just remember, what's happening is the motorcycle's pitching forward. So if we're using rear brake, it's more sensitive to losing traction, right? So that's braking. Anything else about braking?
Yeah, just a quick question about
Yeah, go ahead.
terminology. I just want to make sure that I understand the terms right. So is closing the throttle equal as engine braking equals decelerating? Is that what it is?
Okay, so if I close the throttle.
Okay, that's letting go of the throttle.
Yeah, the throttle's totally closed.
Right.
If I'm in gear, that's engine braking. Is that what you're asking? And that's going to slow you?
I'm confused. I don't know what engine braking means.
Okay. All right. Engine braking. So when let's say you downshift.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And you release the clutch but you're not using the brake. You feel the motorcycle kind of use the gearing to slow you down, right?
Okay, get it. Okay.
That's engine braking, and that is a legitimate way to slow the motorcycle. Okay, I use it all the time. But you run out of slowing potential or ability at a certain point with engine braking. Because if I engine brake and I can't close the throttle anymore to get more braking. So that's why I like to be ready to add brake for finer control. Also, keep in mind, when we do engine braking, it is the equivalent of using rear brake. Okay, because that the motor and the transmission are they're actively slowing the rear wheel. Whereas if I use front brake, now that's actually using the front wheel to grip and help slow. You're getting a little bit more, I guess, precise slowing ability. You can fine tune your slowing ability with front brake. But one other thing about engine braking. So if you've ever driven like a stick shift car and you downshift, right?
Yeah.
That's the same thing as engine braking. I would refer to it. Now I also call engine braking coasting. Is a coasting period. Now, if you read Twist of the Wrist, Keith Code, he talks about the coasting period, okay, between brake and adding throttle. In the automotive world, coasting is known as an engine braking scenario. And so I stuck with that comparison of using those words together. But some people will think that when I say coasting, that I mean you're putting it neutral, like you're freewheeling. But very few people probably think that, but enough do that I think it's worth pointing out here that when I say coasting, it basically means we're riding our motorcycle in gear and we're not using brake or throttle.
Okay.
And we're in gear and it will slow you. And eventually you'll have to put your feet down,
Sorry.
or it'll stall.
Then can I ask you another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
If engine braking is equal to downshifting, what's the relationship between that and lighter, longer braking?
Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, so lighter, longer braking, it works like this. Here's my stop sign. This is where I'm stopping. We'll just say lighter, longer braking now is just in a straight line in this chapter. So we have the stop sign in our motorcycle. If I'm going 20 miles an hour and I go all the way to here and then I apply my brakes, I'll have to brake harder to stop than if I were to start applying my brakes lighter back here.
Okay. Yeah, but
See?
what Francisco's asking, or maybe you're still, when you're doing that lighter, longer braking, you're still in coast mode. You don't have throttle on. You go to coast mode and you're braking.
Right. So very good point, Rick. So let's say,
okay,
if this is what I would call stronger, shorter, okay, stronger braking power over a shorter distance. I close my throttle and then I apply my brakes hard here, okay, to make the stop. I don't start my braking till here. Or I close my throttle at the same point, but I apply a little brake pressure, right? And so I'm applying lighter brake pressure over a longer distance. And think about it like this. Next time you're out riding, you could, if it's like you're going block to block, and there's stop signs. I know you're in Miami, so you probably have block to block. What you can see is if you're, as you approach one, just close the throttle and use your brake with a very faint touch, like just brake light pressure, until, of course, you get to the stop sign. But the other side of the test, you could just hold off a little bit more and then apply more sturdy brake pressure, stronger brake pressure. What you'll feel is the forks will dive a little bit,
Yeah.
more harshly.
Right, but my question, and I guess Rick kind of touched upon it, is like when you're doing that, your RPMs are going down. So how do you control that? I mean, what is it that you do? You just press a clutch and then you just manipulate the brakes? Because that was my concern.
Okay, so if you're coming to a stop sign,
Right.
you'll probably pull the clutch in and downshift to first. Okay, the whole way, and you're using your brakes to slow you down. Now, if you're going into a corner, you may be. This is where we start to bring the skills together, right? So I like to teach the skills in isolation, but we use them together. So what'll happen is a lot of times, if we're in the corners and we're going through curves, there's often times when I'm leaned over and I have to release my clutch in a gear as I'm using brake, and they can be used together. I would say the lighter, longer braking would be a secondary, an advanced thing to work on now for the braking chapter. The most important thing to work on would be two-step braking, and then just getting your brake to throttle transitions down. Once that's taken care of and we're down the road and we've worked out the skills and we've kind of gotten through the book or the course, then we start to reflect on what can I do to keep the chassis flatter. One of the things we can do to keep the chassis flatter is not wait till the last minute to apply strong braking power to stop the motorcycle, right? Now, just to give you one other quick way to explain this. Let's say somebody's going quickly through the corners and they're waiting till the last minute to brake, right? They're waiting till the very last moment that they need to use the brakes. Are they going to have to use them pretty hard?
Yes.
Right. So what I try to tell people that many people may not, I guess, put two and two together here is if you're doing that kind of riding, you don't have to wait and then brake hard. You can use brake light pressure. You can use lighter pressure on the brakes and arrive at the tip-in point at the same speed with less chassis pitch if we use a little lighter pressure over a longer distance.
But I think where maybe Francisco was going, I'm not, is even you're coming into you're coming to even to a stop in fifth gear, Francisco. You roll off the throttle, you put on the brake, and at some point in that between the fifth gear and stopped, you're gonna be pulling your clutch in and downshifting. You're continually downshifting as you go. So there is that component in there.
Yeah.
You always have to keep downshift, downshift, downshift. I'm not sure if that's what you meant with your question.
That's exactly what I meant.
Yeah. So there is, you're continually, all the whole time, pretty much you're even with lighter, longer, your throttle's closed, you're coasting or engine braking, whatever you call it. But you're still going to have to shift down. Oh, and don't get me on that one, John. Freaking blipping like that.
Well, what's going to happen is what eventually, if you were doing this ideally, remember,
yeah.
If one time I was in college and my friend was playing like an Elton John song on the piano, okay, and he took this one hand and he was just going dung 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 dung, and he kept this one going, right? This was doing all kinds of things. That's how it is. Once we learn the skill, we'll be doing brake throttle transitions with smooth downshifting at the appropriate points it's
So
just
for-
learning them in isolation
I
can
guess
be
so.
tricky.
Anyway, sorry, I made a joke there, but so Francisco and John, you cover that later in the book on downshifting
Right.
and all that. But yeah, Francisco, you got to downshift as you slow. You got to continually knock those gears down, right? Or else your bike will stall.
Right. So we always want to match that the engine RPM speed to the road speed as best as we can. Which, by the way, we get to that in the smooth chapter. And most people, get their gear correctly. It's pretty easy to tell if I release my clutch in too high a gear and nothing's happening, I will go down one. And that's one of those things where, remember, riding a motorcycle is difficult to explain to somebody because you have to perform the actions on the motorcycle based off of what someone tells you or how you feel or what you think might happen. And there's a lot of room in there for misunderstandings and that kind of thing. But the most important aspect is getting out there and doing it, right? And trying the different things. But so advice to you, Francisco, what I would focus on when you're thinking about your braking, forget about lighter, longer right now. It's not a huge deal. That's more like an icing on the cake of trying to keep that chassis to have limited pitch. That's it, right?
Okay.
So it'll be finer tuned. If you're using the two-step braking process, you're going to be slowing with less chassis pitch because you're going to lightly load the front before you bring on more instead of a grab and then it quickly dives. And the brake throttle transitions, though, that is the throttle to brake transitions. That's the I guess the major points behind 5 braking. All right. Now, I would like to move on to throttle quickly. I don't have a whole lot about throttle to really cover tonight besides your questions, but we're still working at brake throttle transitions and going from the brake to the throttle. But one of the things I want to make clear is obviously, what is the throttle control? What's its primary job?
Going fast.
Exactly. To accelerate. So yeah, I guess if you're going 0 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour is fast, right? It's 500 times faster, right? But it's to control our speed, right? What a lot of people don't understand is that speed also affects our steering and our direction. All right. It's just, I mean, even if you were to watch the fastest riders in the world, when they get to those really tight switchbacks on the track, they're slowing like you would taking a switchback on a mountain road, right? It's the same principle. There's only so much we can do to fight speed wanting us to make that turn. So what we want to remember is, and I don't have a drawing here, but this is actually the pages from the book. All right, which this particular picture here, it shows us that and I'll read this verbatim. The faster the speed, the slighter the arc must be. The slower the speed, the sharper the arc can be. Now, I've taken a little bit of a beating from people because I use slighter arc instead of wider or other terms. All right. I was, coming up with terminology. That was the one that I chose for various reasons. Where you have, a sharp turn, I thought was pretty obvious, whereas a slight turn, we would think more of a wider or a sweeping type of turn. And the whole idea behind this is, and you might recall this if you've read the book, but if this is the turn here, speed is the determining factor if I'm going to make this turn. I don't know if you guys can see this well down here in the basement here. I got my home studio is not the best right now, but so if I'm going to, I can take, let me get a different color here. At 10 miles an hour, right? I can take this speed, or I can take this turn no problem. If the road actually were even a slighter sweeper 10 miles an hour, I don't have to go fast through a sweeper, but I'm restricted if I'm going 50, right? It may be less possible for me to make that turn. No matter how much I lean, no matter how much I press. And it's for this reason why in the basic rider courses, people are taught to get all your braking done here. So you're ultra conservative and you're going through at 10 miles an hour instead of 50, because the costs are great the one way, right? There is no consequence for going through a corner that you can go through. If it's a 30 mile an hour corner, there's no consequence for going through it at 10, right? It's doable. It's a piece of cake. But but the opposite is not true. If you go through a sharper turn at twice the speed that's recommended for it, that could be real problems. And since throttle controls speed, I put it here because I think it's important at the, right here as we start to get into the meat and potatoes of what I'm teaching in the formula here, that we understand the relationship between our speed and our ability to make the turn, right? Now, a couple things well, let me ask you guys, do you have any questions like really about this particular issue here? Does this pretty much make sense?
Perfect.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I'd like you to keep in mind, and this is also very important as I show down here in this particular image here, that all else being the same, lean angle, okay, line, those types of things, everything being equal, if you were to add throttle, it's going to push you wider. It's going to change your line to the outside. If you close the throttle and slower your speed, it's going to change your line inside. Now, I'm sure most experienced riders in a turn have gotten spooked because they're going too fast and they closed the throttle and they were fine, right? Maybe the person just chopped the throttle close abruptly. Let's say, survival reaction, as Keith Code would say. They just chopped that throttle, but that was the thing to do. It took away drive. It took away speed. And it allowed a slower speed. It allowed the weight to shift a little forward, and that helped make that turn potentially. Okay, could have been the reason why people made it through. Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Okay, perfect. This is just, you've hit on a lot of things here on the throttle and how important it is. And I've been out doing, look, I used to go into corners and keep that throttle there and adjust my line by
leaning
counter steering.
Yes.
But I tell you, the last couple of weeks, and without being abrupt on the throttle, without closing and opening, closing, I found that very touches the throttle mid corner, like if it all decreasing radius or whatever, and it's kind of ingrained in you. Just don't touch that throttle because you'll upset the bike. But
Yeah.
I find it little touches of throttle are way more effective than trying to lean more. That upsets the bike. And also the the pushing of the handlebars is so sensitive. But I find just keeping on that throttle and move, it's almost, I started going, well, nobody talks about this, but it's just that continual movement of that throttle, and then everything else, your body isn't moving, you're not pushing the handlebars. And I find that like it falls in a little bit like this, your bike will fall right in. And because that's where I was getting in panic mode. I'd go in too hot.
Yes.
And but my hand would be frozen on that freaking throttle, right? And so I'd start braking and stuff, but I couldn't get that throttle loose. But I've just been last 2 weeks working that throttle a little bit.
Yep.
And I tell you, it pulls you right around.
You know, Rick, thank you so much for bringing that up, because you explained it very well. So you're leaned over and you're just making subtle changes.
Yeah.
Okay. A little bit on, a little bit off. And what that's doing is it's correcting your line based off of that. And you know what? When I'm riding on twisty roads, I'm doing exactly what you said all the time. And
that's
I'm
what
not
I
even
wanted to cut
sorry
out.
for it.
I wanted to ask him, was I insane? But I found now that throttle is the most active piece of my bike now. I'm just going like this constantly, you know.
Yeah, the way I look at it, Rick, is I am so over the concept that you have to have the line figured out before you tip in.
It's not going to happen.
I that's what this is all about. That's what I think cornering confidence is. So what you're describing is when you get in that turn and you're not happy with something, you're just this subtle movement. Look at, I mean, it's just such a small movement.
That's the one. But what I'm telling you before is, but my hand would be frozen, right? And I could only the only way I get out of it is by braking, which really sets you off, or by trying to lean like hell, and that's unsettling the bike. But until I got, you guys try it if you haven't, just that like you had, just that little bit, man, your line just sucks right in and it pulls right out. Without the big, you don't need the big, if you do the big chop, you're probably, I have never done it, but you're probably done, right? If you have to get to
this is a really good segue because, you know, we have a few minutes left here just to wrap up with Smooth, but this is a really good segue for Rick and everybody else, because one of the key things that Rick said was, and that I reaffirmed here when I said I do this myself, we're not doing this with the throttle. It's so slight. I was just listening to a podcast. There's a podcast called Chasing the Horizon, and this guy Wes Fleming interviewed a Dunlop engineer, and he was talking about the tires and, you know, what goes into the tires and how you know, they're not perfect obviously, but we have really good tires today, and the engineers are building us good tires. They can handle adjustments. They just can't handle abrupt, harsh, extreme adjustments. Now, sometimes they can probably. I'm sure there's been someone who's really hammered on it and that tire held. Did the person really understand what happened? I don't know. But what I'll say for the smoothness chapter here is we want to eliminate abruptness. So if you're doing anything on your motorcycle that is an abrupt movement, try to stop doing that. Try to restrict those types of behaviors, because while the motorcycle will probably stay upright, it's not going to want to respond to those inputs as well as it could if they were smooth. Now, with this particular chapter, I ask people to just reflect on the use of the controls. Are they doing smooth brake throttle transition? So braking and throttle chapters talk about the brake throttle transitions. Now we're trying to work on just ultra smooth delivery of one to the other. And one of the core concepts that I have in the book that really came from Nick Einoch's Yamaha Champions Rider School, he talks a lot about the tires being able to handle a very heavy load, but not a sudden load. Okay, so we can, if we're doing something smooth and gradual, we're not going to overwhelm the traction available to us. Now, one of the things, obviously, there's two things with this chapter. Make sure what you're doing is smooth and very gradual, nothing abrupt, right? But then the other one has to do with the slick shifting, right? Have you guys been working on shifting and smooth? How is your shifting? Is it smooth? Anybody have any comments about that?
Pretty good. Just as a note with that, my new BMW, it's got that.
It has
shift,
the
right?
Pro setup, right?
Well, you can shift without using the clutch, which I don't like doing. But sometimes when you preload the clutch, it's enough to kick that thing in. So it pisses you off sometimes, right? But other than that, yeah, that slick shifting, preload, just little nudge with the clutch works great.
Yeah. So I
downshifting, I'm still not 100% happy, but
yeah.
I've been trying blipping, but
well, my thing with the blip, I don't like the blip. I don't like a quick movement. I don't think it's necessary. What I tell people is obviously you want to preload the shifter and the palm pull just a little bit, and it does its thing. One other thing that I really haven't talked too much about in the book or the course even is if I'm going to upshift, so I'm going to lift up my foot, right, and lift the gear shaft lever up, I usually will release the clutch and then move my foot from tension on the gear shift lever. Yeah, okay. You know, I don't usually, I'm very delicate removing my foot from the gear shift lever on an upshift till after like that clutch is released. And there's a, if you reflect on how you're shifting the gears with or without a special slipper clutch or whatever, like whatever people have, these quick shifters, we can really make a nice smooth shift that keeps the chassis nice, especially if if you're tipping into a turn and you're releasing the clutch.
Yeah.
You know, you want to make sure it's a nice smooth delivery. And what I tell people is, if you do the shift fast enough, you can almost keep a steady throttle at a quarter turn. But I do find oftentimes I'm relieving or rolling on just a little bit when I release the clutch to match those revs. But I do know that there are professionals that teach the blip technique, you know, overkill for the street. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. So just a little bit of a slight manipulation of the throttle and it works beautifully. Now, when I was doing a coaching tour in Iowa 2 years ago, one of the people said, when we were going up and down hills, I was practicing the smooth slick shifting. And I thought that, and so I like to tell people that now, you know, it's when you're going up and down hills, that's a good time. You know, just if you're going in a straight line, that's a really good time to just practice those smooth shifts. Cause you're not going, sometimes first gear to second could be a little, lurching because you're just starting out. But if you're going, third, fourth gear up and down hills at 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, whatever, it's kind of easier to kind of, I guess, practice that. But teaching someone how to slick shift is really, it's difficult to teach someone how to do that. But I tried to put it in words and show the videos in my course and stuff like that.
No, it was you did a good job on that. and it works well. It's
One
nice.
other thing too. What do you guys think of the? Do you guys like running a higher or lower gear in a turn?
I usually come in lower, just so I have that, not so low that it's bogging down, but
Mhm.
pretty much the limit where you can get a good pull.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you're going to want to get through that turn. Like I say, there's enough going on that the last thing I want to be doing is shifting.
Yeah.
If I
Well,
can
I will
avoid
say,
it.
yeah, right. Well, one of the things I took the Yamaha Champions Champ Day at New Jersey Motorsports Park, and it was a rainy day. And I remember Nick Einach saying, let's run a little higher gear today, right? And I liked the whole concept behind that because it kind of it validated a lot of what I think about running a little higher gear. Now we know that there's an appropriate gear. That's the right gear that we like for the turn. If given a choice to go too high or too low, I'll typically upshift, only because what can happen if you downshift into too low a gear?
Yeah, you don't want to bog the thing down.
Well, no, if it's in too low a gear, that could act like rear brake. It could,
Oh, yeah.
and so
Yeah.
I think that's why Nick said let's run a little higher gear, because you're less likely.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I had
You
I
hit
had
it backwards.
kind of
Yeah.
back.
So
I
remember
had
that.
it backwards there. I go in. Yeah. So it would be I'm sorry, a higher gear. Yeah.
So my whole
Okay.
thinking is, if let's just say I realize if I'm leaned in that I'm in too high a gear,
Yeah.
what's going to happen is I'm rolling on the gear. And if I'm 2 gears above, I'm going to have to change that gear. But typically, if I have to make the choice, right, between too low or too high a gear, I'll usually prefer the higher gear, because as I accelerate out, it's going to catch up to it.
Yeah,
And,
sorry, I had it. My mouth was moving faster than my brain.
Yeah.
I had it backwards there. I was thinking low is slow, or slow
Yeah.
RPMs. But whatever.
It's
Hitting the
definitely
lower RPMs. Yeah.
Right. And so I do want to say thanks for coming out tonight. Next week, we're going to be talking about vision, lines, and cornering. Those chapters. Vision is probably not going to take me too long. Lines, I took a huge beating in a review recently from someone who took my course, hated my line selection stuff. And his biggest problem was that I should be teaching late apexes and, these types of things, which I'm not against the late apex, but I think that lines, there's the real world and there's the perfect world. There's the planned line, there's the realistic line. One of the most fulfilling things that I guess felt riding a motorcycle is the liberating ability to change my line whenever I want. And I think that going along with, we talked about the throttle, a little slight on and off. We talked about that helping us. Being able to change our line in the turn, it's kind of like a light bulb goes off over your head, especially when I teach these coaching tours and they're shocked at how easy it is just to change your line in a curve. So we're going to talk about line selection. And then the cornering, we'll see. I'm trying not to stretch out the series too many classes. This is going to be like 5 or 6, But what I'm planning on doing in the future is maybe just picking one chapter for half an hour or something based on what people want to talk about, because now I own Zoom. I signed up for it. I can do this anytime I want for as long as I want. And I find that they're really good. It's a really good venue for what I'm trying to accomplish personally. So the cornering, there's a lot in the cornering chapter, but we'll see what we can get through over the next couple of sessions here. And any final questions or comments? What do you think?
That was good. No, thanks. I'm going to try all that stuff and report back.
All right, I'm going to do the same thing tomorrow. I'm going to get out there tomorrow and I'm going to try to think about it. What I'm thinking before I report back. What I'm thinking is I'll be closing, and I'm probably using this part of my thumb as a hook, to sort of make that change.
Yeah.
But I'm going to reflect on it for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
That was good. Thanks.
All right. We'll catch you guys next
Thanks,
time.
John.
Thanks. Yep. We'll see you. Have a good week. Take care. Email me directly if you have any questions. All right.
Perfect.
See you.
Thank you.
Night.